to Next Round with the Pacific Research Institute. I'm Rowena Ichon. In this podcast, our All Stars convene to discuss the first Democratic presidential debates. On the hot seat with me is Tim Anaya, Director of Communications at PRI, Carrie Jackson, PRI Fellow on California Reform, and making an all-star debut appearance is Wayne Weingarten, Senior Fellow in Business and Economics. So without further ado, let's go to the All Stars. So first off, let's make the rounds here. What do you think were the key takeaways from the first debate? And I'll just start it off. You know, when I looked at these debates, I know that they're not intended for conservative and free market audiences like us. So I tried to put on my liberal hat, or if I were a middle of the road voter and I wasn't committed to either party. So that being said, you know, since Biden is a front runner, I thought he turned in a very mediocre performance last night. He looked a bit muddled. He didn't project a lot of confidence. And, you know, this is probably the authentic Biden. And if I were farther left, I'd be probably pretty proud of Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders' performance. I thought they did well. I think that, you know, I'd be hopeful that they could overtake Biden over time. Wearing my conservative hat, I can take away from this debate was that finally, you know, Medicare for all is going to be was exposed last night, because we're seeing polls that Americans still don't really believe that their insurance is going to be taken away by Medicare for all. And I think some of the candidates made that plain and clear last night in the debates. And I think that would have a lot of Americans worried. And also, you know, I think that as a conservative, and I don't think this is a win on Trump's part overall, but I think that he'd probably be sitting pretty comfortably if he had to debate any of these guys, at least on, if not policy points, but definitely on style and showmanship. I thought the whole debate was sort of boring and a dud, and I'd have to agree with him. Tim, what do you think?
Well, I had two big takeaways. First, as Joe Biden experienced, it's clear that moderation and statesmanship and deal cutting aren't going to get you anywhere on the Democratic primary debate stage. And if you're having to explain yourself about working and cutting deals with segregationist Democratic senators from the past, you're probably losing big league, as Donald Trump would say. The other takeaway is I was stunned just how much Bernie Sanders has really captured the Democratic stage. You know, the things that the candidates were talking about, decriminalizing illegal immigration, Medicare for all, and outlawing private insurance, a middle-class tax increase to pay for health care. These are things that are light years away from what Hillary Clinton and even Barack Obama were talking about in their campaigns not too long ago. And if you notice on the stage, the candidates were tripping over themselves in the second debate, particularly to say, I agree with Bernie. So I think he continues to be the intellectual force of the Democratic Party.
Carrie?
Well, if he's the intellectual force of the Democratic Party, then that party, I think the country is in trouble. I have to choose my words carefully here, but I find Bernie Sanders to not be a very good thinker. Since he's become famous, he's been promoting the systems in Scandinavia, Sweden, Norway, Denmark. But you don't have to look back too far or look too hard to find out he aligned himself with Ortega and the Sandinistas, Fidel in Cuba. He had good things to say about Soviet Union. So there's something. He's not making connections in his mind there. Like I said, I got to be careful what I say. But what I see from this party on the two nights, and not everybody, there were 20 people, but not all 20 of them, but quite a few of them, the main characters, shall we say, very angry people, just mad. Joe Biden has always tried to project himself as the happy warrior, good old Uncle Joe, backslapper, everything's going to be okay, we're all positive and moving ahead here. But he's, as Rose said, he looks like he slipped a lot. He just didn't seem to be on top of his game. And the anger and this isn't my observation, this is something part of it is my observation, not all of it, but there's so much anger out of these people. But you look at Trump, and Trump, he seems to be positive, he seems to be upbeat, And he'll say some negative things about his opponents, certainly, but he is upbeat about the country. And I don't know how this is going to play out in the long term for the Democrats, especially when it gets down to a handful, and if they're all going to be mad about something. And Bernie Sanders seems to be very mad about something all the time. I don't know how that's going to come across in November of next year.
Wayne, what do you think?
Well, my favorite person on stage out of both nights was Congressman Delaney. And one line he said that just stuck with me, and it was funny, I didn't see anyone picking up on this. He said, "We need real solutions, not impossible promises." And I think that phrase just summed up what all 19 other people on that stage were doing. Impossible promises, inaccurate statistics, and this need to create this us versus them. Now, I think President Trump does that as well, and I think that whole concept is very dangerous just to kind of our social fabric. But you really saw it on display last night where, oh, it's not your fault that, you don't have as much income as you want. It's the top 1%. Or it's not your fault that healthcare costs are so high. It's the, evil insurance company or whatever the case. There was way too much hatred being spewed. And I think I agree. Most successful politicians, they have that happy warrior. They give us aspirational kind of visions, and you didn't see that on stage. I actually thought Bernie Sanders seemed flat. He seemed a bit of the shell of himself. His ideas certainly have moved the party, but I think, unfortunately, but Kamala Harris and Elizabeth Warren I think they are going to be leading in that lane of the Democrat Party. And again, I agree with whatever you guys said. I think Biden looked tired, and Castro and Buttigieg, in terms of that more centrist lane, looked a lot more vibrant and a lot more kind of ready for the fight, which if that continues, I think we could see a changing of the guard, so to speak.
But I wonder if this anger plays well among the far left, among liberals and Democrats. What do you think of that? Maybe not to us.
I think so too, because just take a look at the bumper stickers you see on a daily basis about how angry people are about somebody driving a nicer car than they are, somebody living in a nicer house than they are, having more things. That's a lot of anger gets generated by jealousy. And I for a long time, I think that's what's animated this party, or at least the left side of the political spectrum, has been a lot of jealousy.
The question is, and my view is that anger might get you the 26% of people who are Democrats, but it's not going to get you the 38, or maybe slightly off with my numbers there, of the independents. And that's going to be the median voter. That's going to decide who wins. And I think the anger turns off a lot of your independent suburban families, and could be a way where they lose it.
I agree with you, Wayne. One of the other constituencies that I think people aren't focusing on, and they're a small but important voter bloc for the general election, and that's the disaffected or never Trump Republican. And in 2016, most of them voted for Trump, or, the numbers were pretty small, that it didn't affect the outcome. But I saw today David Brooks, who's one of the most prominent never Trump Republicans, had a column today, and the headline was, "Democrats Don't Drive Me Away." And the reaction to that column from liberals on Twitter has been so hostile. I think that underscores your point, Wayne, about it's not just about the base. You've got to win the general election, too.
So let's turn to policy. Do you think that these debates signaled to you what the policy battlegrounds will be among the Democrats? For me, I thought that the case made for the public option in healthcare was pretty well made by some of the candidates, and doesn't go as far as Medicare for all, but I thought that was a pretty intriguing position, and I think that may serve as a wedge for those in the party. I thought in cases like immigration and climate change, I think they were all trying to out-left one another. I thought what fell short in debates was any kind of real discussion on foreign policy. I thought that was a fault of the NBC moderators. I thought there was just a short-shrifted, shallow questions on foreign policy. And I think they're going to be pretty big issues going forward. Tim, what do you think?
Oh, I agree on the public option. I think Mayor Pete said it best when he talked about Medicare for all who wanted. I think that's clever strategy to navigate through the murky waters of, Medicare for all, and, as Bernie Sanders talked about, the huge middle-class tax increases that will be required to pay for it. I think you saw Sanders and Warren battling it out, with their typical kind of class warfare, anti-capitalist rants against Wall Street and pharmaceutical companies and big banks. But I think, as I mentioned earlier, the real dilemma is Democrats moving so far to the left that it's going to set them up for an epic general election defeat. The New York Post had a great headline on Friday morning, "Who wants to lose the election?" And I saw another reporter tweet out on Friday morning that someone was sitting next to them at a watch party during the second debate, and that person was openly questioning to them whether or not they're still a Democrat after watching the things that the candidates were talking about. And, that's a real dilemma for them, when you have, core Democratic voters questioning whether the party still represents them based on the far left tone of the debate.
The funny thing about that left tone, and I agree with you, there was no policy really discussed if you talk about actual policy. They talked about, my favorite question was to Bernie Sanders, how would you implement Medicare for all? And the answer was, I'm going to implement it because we have the political will and we're going to implement it. And that's not the question, and that's not the problem. Medicare for all is expensive. It's impossible. It's going to lead to healthcare rationing and shortages. And maybe the debate format, you can't get at these questions, but that's the underlying problem across all of their policy, whether it's the Green New Deal. These proposals are unrealistic. And what I found frustrating is the format and the moderators let them get away with making statements that are factually incorrect. I mean, one thing that was funny, they were talking about how the middle class hasn't had a increase in their incomes in 40 years. And I'm sitting there, I was watching with my son, and I pulled up on my phone and I grabbed a chart offline that showed median household income adjusted for inflation. And guess what? It's grown. But these type of factual errors just pervaded the entire debate, and it's just disgusting to watch.
I'm going to go back to something that Tim said earlier about a watch party. And I know that there were some of those, and that scares me. Why would anybody take their time to go to a party to watch something so, I find, no matter what party is having these debates, pretty miserable and essentially, I don't want to say irrelevant, but without substance. 2 hours with very little substance there. I guess I could get on a sawhorse and say, yeah, I'm worried about the future of the country going forward if we're putting so much focus on politics. But I've long thought we shouldn't focus so much on politics. I've said that I think that we'd all be better off if we knew the name of our butcher down the street more than we knew the name of the president of the United States, unless there was some huge crisis that the president had to lead us in, say, like a third world war. But also what Tim was saying, it's no more Democrats. I think he said somebody at the party someone said, turned to another party, said, where do all the Democrats go? And the big thing I see, and it's been coming on for a while, and it's just really came out strong in these two debates, is, are we going to does the Democratic Party want to have an incremental movement towards socialism, or is it just once over the cliff all at one time? And that seems to me to be the key battles within that party right now.
We talked about a little bit about the format of these debates. What did you think about the mix between the major contenders and the minor contenders? And how do you think that the selection process ultimately influenced the debate? Did it help or did it hurt? And, for myself, I thought the first night was a total waste of time because clearly Elizabeth Warren dominated that night. And I would have liked to see her among the main front runners on the second night. And I thought there were just too many candidates in the audience or on the platform, and I didn't think that really lent itself to any real understanding or any in-depth understanding of the candidates' views. Tim?
Oh, I agree with you. I don't think the mix of the major and minor candidates was a big factor, really, in either of the debates. The real problem was if you got picked for the first debate, because it's obvious the second debate sucked all the oxygen out of the first debate. Julian Castro and Tulsi Gabbard, by all accounts, had very good performances in the first debate, but no one's really talking about it after Thursday night.
Carrie?
I think the setup they have, I don't know what else they could do with so many candidates, 24, they had to leave 4 of them out. But it might have given someone on the outside or right outside the bubble a chance to get inside the bubble, and maybe that's what we're seeing a little bit, as Tim mentioned, Castro and Gabbard specifically. I think that may be the only thing that we're going to see come out of this that we'll remember. Somebody, a dark horse, somebody who wasn't inside that tight circle, becoming a viable candidate for a while.
Oh, really? Do you think that any of the dark horses will actually percolate up top, Carrie?
No, but they might end up being considered for a VP, a running mate.
Wayne, what do you think?
No, I think Castro had a strong enough performance, if he can follow up on that he might be able to start to play with the big boys, so to speak. So I think he has an opportunity to really move ahead. But I thought the format itself was awful. I mean, you really didn't have a chance. There's, I think, a lot more creative ways that they could have created an actual debate, and I think they should have, should think towards some of these more creative formats that people have been suggesting.
Let's contrast the first and second debates. What were the standouts in each debate, and what were the surprises and disappointments? For me, in terms of the majors, as I said earlier, I thought Biden turned in a mediocre performance, and I would have liked to see him match with Sanders and Warren. As far as the minor candidates, I thought pretty much the worst of all 20 candidates was Beto O'Rourke. His Spanish, when he spoke Spanish initially, I thought it seemed contrived to me. And I'm a former speechwriter, so I understand the importance or the rhetorical importance of speaking a few words in the native language of your audience. But O'Rourke went on and on and on, and you started to think that you weren't privy to whatever he was saying. And I only know school Spanish because I only took it in school. I don't know Spanish. So I was really kind of disturbed by that. But overall, I thought he turned in a terrible performance. He looked amateurish and boyish and sort of like a kid who's like, how did I get to this party? And Cory Booker, on the other hand, totally on the other side of the spectrum, I thought he was over the top, theatrical, tried to project all of this anger and outrage that seemed kind of phony to me. And I agree with what some of you said here, that Castro was a standout and never really paid much attention to him until this debate. And while I don't agree with probably most anything he says, I thought that he was able to separate himself from the fray. In terms of Kamala Harris, well, she's our senator here, and I didn't think she helped or hurt herself. I thought I didn't think that these debates really moved the ball for her. What do you think, Tim?
Well, I agree that Beto was probably the biggest disappointment of the debates. He clearly didn't belong on the stage. The thing I loved the most watching the debate on Twitter, too, was the memes that went viral of the other candidates giving Beto some eye shade when he did his speaking in Spanish and his other pandering moments. I thought that Andrew Yang, who has a lot of big fans on Twitter, and I see lots of tweets about the Yang Gang, was really underwhelming as well. You know, he really didn't have anything to say other than his universal basic income platform, and he really didn't articulate that very well. I thought Amy Klobuchar also had a very bad performance. You know, it seemed like she stumbled over her words every time it was her turn to speak. But, you know, for me, the biggest standout, of course, was Marianne Williamson. You know, she was the top searched candidate on Google in the second debate. And now I must admit, I didn't know who she was beforehand. And my friend I was texting with told me that she was big in the yoga world and that she liked her until she started running for president. Now, I think there's all sorts of stuff going on with Marianne. You know there's a story there. We just don't quite know what it is. I, for one, hope she makes it to the stage for every debate. She's clearly the candidate most likely to get a reality show after her debate performance.
There are times when I thought if I had to pick a favorite, and that's probably not the correct word for what we're doing here today, but that's what I'm going to go with. It would have been Hickenlooper. But every time I thought, well, this fellow's making some sense. He seems rational, reasonable. He would kind of run off on something else and go, I'd go, yeah, you left it right there. You're going pretty straight, but you crossed a double yellow, and now you got oncoming traffic, and you got to be careful. I'd have to say, yeah, Beto was probably a disappointment to a lot of people. His supporters were probably thinking, gee, you could have done better than that. And Marianne Williamson, very odd person to be in that position, but she did not act like, why am I here? You know, I don't understand. I'm surprised to be here. When she had her opportunity, she went hard at them and she made her points, and she acted like, yeah, I should be here.
She embraces her nuttiness, Carrie.
She does.
Wayne?
She's authentic, right? That's very important in a candidate. You've got to be authentic, and she is authentic. She's not serious, obviously. And I love, Tim, I love your caricature. She is the most likely to get a reality show. I think, to me, the most interesting is how poorly I thought Sanders did. And I think he looked more tired than people are giving credit for. I mean, obviously, Joe Biden looked just incredibly lost. And I would say if he doesn't start to kind of turn that image around, that he actually might be in trouble as the kind of the leader of the pack, and certainly the leader of that centrist lane in the Democrat Party. And I think Buttigieg had enough of a solid performance that he could actually pick up that momentum, because he looked forceful. He looked like he had ideas, and he was ready to be there. So I thought he had a very good performance the other night. And again, I still thought that Delaney, who has no chance at all, but that his ideas are an important counterweight. And so I would like to see him stay on the stage in order to kind of keep pushing that counterweight, because you have the Sanders and the Warren pulling that party leftward. And it was really, I thought, refreshing to see someone on the stage that's trying to pull the party back toward a more moderate position. So I hope he was a big winner. I think that's more of a hope than an actual assessment. But the more we can see him on stage, and the more you can see him trying to have a counterweight in the party against that leftward drift, I think it's important for kind of the American institutions in general to have one of the major parties go that radical is terrifying and is problematic.
So let's talk about the 5 debate moderators: Lester Holt, Chuck Todd, Savannah Guthrie, Rachel Maddow, and Jose Diaz-Balart. So grade the moderators. Do you think that they did a good job in challenging the candidates on their positions and pressing them on the specifics? Well, if I were going to grade them, I'd give them all Fs except Chuck Todd. I thought that they were all chewing on the left. They never asked the tough questions. They didn't ask, how much does this cost? How are we going to pay for it? None of that was ever brought up. And they were allowed to say, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And this is free and that is free. But other than Chuck Todd, who gave a measure of balance to some of his questions, I thought that they just gave them a free ride on all of these tough budget questions. And I thought I was very disappointed. Again, I thought this was a silly hodgepodge Jeopardy format where it was very difficult to compare the candidates on their views. We're all kind of professional, semi-professional watchers of these debates. I'm just wondering, the general audience out there, it was very, very difficult to glean anything out of the candidates' positions, and I blame that squarely on the moderators. And then, of course, there was the glitch, the sound glitch, which I turned to Fox right after the end of the debates, and I thought the hosts were very gracious, actually, and they didn't actually gloat about it. But I still think it was pretty awful. With one of the biggest nights for NBC, and they dropped the ball. What do you think, Tim?
Well, I agree about the moderators really didn't have control over the format, and you saw that with, the candidates just said whatever they wanted to say, regardless of what the question was. And I get that. You at most you're only going to have about 10 minutes total to speak over the course of 2 hours, and they wanted to get their notes in. But a good moderator would bring out of them, answers to the questions that were asked. Now, I disagree on Chuck Todd. I actually thought he was the worst of all the moderators. The worst thing, even worse than the microphone glitch. And what I thought was bad about Chuck Todd was he perpetuated the game. He perpetuated the, asking the candidates to raise their hands and asking for 2 or 3 word answers. And you're right, this isn't a game show. Ask a question and let the candidates answer as they will. We want to hear a complete answer, even from Marianne Williamson. Now, I thought the best moderator was Savannah Guthrie. She asked tough and fair questions about where the candidates stood on things like single payer, and she wanted specifics. And when the candidates just gave their stump speech applause lines, she followed up and she held their feet to the fire until they provided as much specifics as she could get out of them.
What do you think, Wayne?
I agree that I thought Savannah was the best. I thought she did a fantastic job given the constraint. I think it's the wrong format. I think if you could have done something more like almost like a tournament style where you have an actual debate format where you actually have a question that you're given that you debate going back and forth, and then you kind of move on where it's almost a one-on-one. Elizabeth Warren is up there against Pete Buttigieg, and they're talking about what's the healthcare, single payer gradually versus, and a public option. And then they go away and then new people come. Some type of format that you could actually elicit information from. And so I think the moderators, given the format, they were set up to fail because you're not going to get anything interesting out of that format. So I would give them all Fs because there was no way they could succeed.
Carrie?
I would give them an across-the-board C, maybe a C minus. So I'm not too far out there with all the rest of y'all. However, I'll give them an all F because one issue by itself, and that's the way they allowed the candidates to treat immigration. Now, no matter what you think about immigration, or no matter what you think about Donald Trump, the candidates completely went way beyond the truth and stuck to the lies that we're seeing in the media. And of course, these moderators are in the media, so they're going to allow this to happen. But they talked about cages. They talked about separating children from their parents. And I believe it was Hickenlooper might have said this as well as Marianne Williamson. They said it was kidnapping to go up there and grab some kid out of a parent's arms. Well, these things were in place before Trump. Trump didn't come in and say, these are the things I want to do. I want to build cages, and I want to take children out of their parents' arms. These policies were in place. This stuff has been documented. It's out there, and yet the Democrats run with it. They blame Trump. They act like he's the author of this evil stuff. When he came in office, this is the way it was. And they just didn't challenge them one bit on that. So I find that to be a disservice just to the truth in general.
I'm glad you brought that up because I totally agree with that. Nobody brought that up, and these policies were already in place during the Obama administration. So
I'll add this: those two poor folks, I believe it was a father and a daughter, were found, and the photo has gone all around the internet, and that was brought up in the debates. How can we allow this to happen? This isn't us. This isn't the way we operate. Well, hundreds died during the 8 years of Obama, but we didn't hear about that. It's like homeless situation now. We talked about. Nobody talks about the homeless when there's a Democrat in the White House, but when a Republican gets in the White House, it becomes a big deal. The media's all over the homeless situation. So that's what it looks like with this. Tragedy happens. It happened during the Obama administration. But just didn't get talked about. In fact, somebody, I think it was Breitbart, they brought where they had written 20 stories during the Obama years about immigrants trying to cross the border who died doing so. But yet they act like this is the only time it's ever happened.
And a logical question would have been to ask Vice President Biden and Secretary Castro, what did you do on your watch when you had a chance to do something about it?
That would have been, put them on the spot.
So imagine you're President Trump watching the debate. If you were him, which candidate on stage would you fear the most following their debate performance? And what do you think can cut into the president's current policy advantages the most? Well, if I were a moderate Dem, I think those candidates that were offering a public option and those who were hammering him on trade could probably be among the most threatening, but they're not, as far as I can see, the front runners right now. But, I know that Trump is behind in the national polls for most of the front runners. But remember, he only has to win in the battleground states. And he's been talking about a health care plan, which we haven't seen yet. But you never know with Trump. He might come up with his own public option. We don't know. And, of course, he's got to hammer out the trade agreements because the stakes are pretty high there. And who knows, if he doesn't solve it, we could be sliding into a recession in the back half of 2020. Tim?
Well, if I were President Trump, I would fear Kamala Harris in a debate setting. She was unrelenting and very effective in her debating style. Now, Trump is brash and over the top and dominating in the way that he debates and gives an interview. But Kamala Harris proves she's no shrinking violet, and she showed that she has the toughness to take on anyone. I think she could do well against Trump in a debate, regardless of the policy differences that he will exploit. Now, as far as the candidate who could cut into the president's policy advantages, I would say that candidates like Delaney and Hickenlooper and Bennett, who made an effective case that Republicans will eat the Democrats for lunch if they're defined as socialists, they came across as moderate voices of reason, embracing capitalism and market economies and individual liberty, even though they are obviously of the left politically. I think Mayor Pete could be tough too. He's humble, he's a veteran, he's a church-going Christian. It's hard to find a lot of fault with him to attack. And I thought it was very refreshing, his line when he was challenged about the tragic shootings in South Bend, Indiana. He actually was humble and he said, I didn't get the job done, when pressed about what could have been done better or differently. And I think he could really be appealing in a way that Obama was. He's somebody that everybody likes. And ultimately, when we're picking a president, most Americans pick people that we like over people who are either the most qualified or have the platform that's closest to our own political views.
Tim, I would have to say I agree with you. I disagree with you on Kamala Harris and agree with you with Buttigieg. I thought Kamala Harris seemed like Hillary Clinton too. She seemed angry. She seemed cold. yes, she's probably going to be a good debater against Trump, but I think she misses that kind of warmth factor, engaging to women. She seems like an unhappy warrior to me. Buttigieg, on the other hand, I think he's a very powerful stealth candidate, just like Obama, in that he looks moderate. He looks has even a kind of a presidential way about him, but he is, I think, a tremendous liberal and pretty as left as you can be. And I think that makes him very, very dangerous. He looks moderate, but I think he's quite the lefty. Carrie, what do you think?
This question had been asked of me 24 hours ago. My answer would be different, but then today it's going to be Kamala Harris, I think, would be the one that Trump should fear the most. My number two would be Elizabeth Warren, but she comes off as being more shrill than Harris, although Harris is quite combative. And as you say, she's almost like the next Hillary Clinton of being churlish up there. You know, the grandmother who, I shouldn't say the grandmother, but the lady who's going to make things hard on me. But I think she's going to get away with that a little bit more. So I think that's the one that he needs to fear the most. Like I say, I would not have thought this 24 hours ago, but the way she came out, if she can keep that up, she's going to build a lot of momentum for the anger cabal that seems to be moving the Democratic Party at this point.
Wayne?
I think he needs to fear the centrist candidates the most. And that comes from his polling numbers, right? You have a president who's never been above 50%. And so the way I'm looking at it is you've got a lot of charismatic, and Buttigieg tops my list right now, of candidates who can go out there, who can stand toe-to-toe with him, and they come out looking much better, more presidential, and there's a certain comfort level. Even though Buttigieg is so young, Mayor Pete, he gives you this feeling of security. And after 4 years of all of this volatility, I think that security is going to have value. So you have that kind of that warm, friendly feeling of Mayor Pete, and then he debates well and he provides the security. I think someone like that provides a lot for the president to be worried about.
Final question. So in the vein of McLaughlin Group, who is the biggest winner of the first Democratic debate and why? And who is the biggest loser and why? Well, I think the biggest loser was Biden. He turned in a dull performance. He could potentially drive some of the moderates and establishment Democrats to the other candidates, and even to the candidates who are more left. I thought the biggest winner was Trump, frankly. It's not going to seal his win, this debate, but I think he's got to be pretty confident going into any debate with these guys. Tim?
I think the biggest loser was Beto O'Rourke. I mean, his terrible performance really let the air out of the tires of any cool factor he had from his run for the Senate in Texas. I think he just looked phony and pandering and inauthentic and small compared to real liberal leaders on the stage who have actual credibility and accomplishments on the issues that he's suddenly woke about. I think the clear winner was Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who emerged as the number one villain of both debates, even more than President Trump. And it reinforces really just how effective he's been at stopping the liberal agenda in the Senate and confirming conservative judges. According to Google, he was the top trending search on all of Google during the second half of the first debate.
Carrie?
Biggest winner, I'm going to say the American people, because they got to see exactly what's going on. They may have been missing some of this while the rest of us have been watching it go on. Now it's on television for 2 straight nights. So I think they got some information they sorely needed. The biggest loser, I'm going to say Yang, because I saw where people who were blogging away last night during the second debate, they thought that there were times he left the stage. He wasn't even out there. Of course, they were kidding. He was out there, but he had so little to say and so little time to say it that he even be in the next round.
And he was a loser for not wearing a tie.
That was very odd.
It's California.
Wayne, what about you?
I have to have a tie for the biggest loser. I think Beto and Yang I think they lost so badly that they're now zombie candidates, and they don't realize that their campaign is over, but it is. It's certainly for Beto that there's been so many attempts to kind of restart his campaign and kind of come up with a new Beto and rebrand that it's too late. And I think Andrew's the same way. They're now zombie candidates. I have to say, I think the biggest winner was Kamala Harris. I think she came out of kind of where she was kind of in. She was losing a little bit of ground. She wasn't kind of taking over that kind of far left lane. And now she's a real contender for that lane. I think Elizabeth Warren now has to start paying attention to her. I think Bernie Sanders is going to have a problem because Kamala Harris showed herself to be, I thought, a strong kind of, she's a fighter, and she's going to get down there, and she speaks well. And this morning they were reporting after that debate, she had her third biggest fundraising day of the campaign. She's going to get, I think, a huge boost out of this. And I think unequivocally, she was the biggest winner.
Anyway, we're ending our podcast. We'd all agree it was a big challenge for free marketeers like ourselves to spend 4 hours watching candidates who want single payer and want to raise our taxes and who like socialism. So for all of the All-Stars, what was your drink of choice throughout the debate? And I'll start. Mine was a winery I discovered about a month and a half ago when I was visiting Sonoma called Under the Wire, Alder Springs. And they make sparkling Pinot and sparkling Chardonnay. And as many of you know, it's pretty hot here in Pasadena over the summer. So I'm going to be drinking those bottles along with, I guess, watching more debates. What about you, Tim?
Well, I also was on the sparkling theme. I drank a bottle of one of my favorite wines, which is a sparkling rosé from Hellwig Winery, which is in Plymouth in Amador County. But unfortunately, I drank through it all about 30 minutes into the second debate. So I had to switch to another bottle, which was a bottle of Chardonnay that we picked up at our luncheon following our policy conference in Sacramento, and it's a great bottle of Chardonnay from Clarksburg Wine Company, which you can get. They have a tasting room out at the old sugar mill for those of you here in the Sacramento region.
Carrie?
I had an IPA from a brewery called Made West, and it seemed to be very fitting for everything that went on.
How about you, Wayne?
I guess I'm a simple guy. I was just drinking Coronas.
Okay, thanks for everyone until the next All-Stars meeting. Thanks to our All-Star team, Tim Anaya, Carrie Jackson, and Wayne Weingarten. Check out our blogs on Right by the Bay at pacificresearch.org. Also, if you're in the Bay Area, join us for a luncheon on July 9th with Daniel Hannan, member of the European Parliament. Mr. Hannan discusses Brexit and the prospects for a stronger alliance between the U.S. and UK. If you like this episode, please tell your friends and subscribe to PRI's podcast at iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or TuneIn. And please do us a favor and give us 5 stars. You can also listen to our podcast on PRI's YouTube page, youtube.com/Pacific Research 1. That's the number 1. Thanks for listening. I'm Rowena Ichon. We hope you'll come back again for Next Round with PRI.